I've been a very passionate user of the X100V for the past 2 years, and when Fujifilm announced that they were releasing a new one, obviously I was very excited. I've had some money put away for the past few months that I've been saving to buy the new version of the X100, but to be honest, after watching the Fuji X Summit this morning, I don't think that I'm going to. And while today will be a day where loads of YouTubers will tell you that this is the best camera they've ever used, I want to give a slightly alternative opinion on that and tell you that you don't really need one. And this is coming from someone who is a massive fan of Fujifilm cameras. So first off, let's talk about what we're getting in the new X100 compared to the X100V. We're getting Fujifilm's new X-Trans5 40 megapixel sensor. This is the same sensor that is found in the X-T5. We're getting 6-stop inbuilt image stabilization. We're also getting 3 new film simulations. These are Nostalgic Negative, Reality Ace and Eternate Bleach Bypass. We're getting an upgraded autofocus system which includes AI tracking modes. And we're getting a huge boost to video specs. These are 4K 60 frames a second in 10-bit and we're getting 6K 30 frames a second. The size is pretty much the same. The new one is a tiny bit bigger, but you're probably not going to notice. The EVF and the OVF are exactly the same as the one in the V. The battery is the same, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. There's still no native weather sealing on the camera. You still need to buy the adapter that goes on the front of the lens. And much like the V, we have a very high price point. The new camera in the UK is going to be £1,599. Everything that I'm about to say is of course just my own personal opinion, but at such a high price point for a fixed lens camera, I do feel like it's important to consider all sides of the argument. Obviously the new version of the camera is better, but here's why I'm personally not upgrading to the X100 Mark VI. Let's go over all the same specs we spoke about and discuss some potential issues. So first up we have the 40 megapixel sensor, and there's 3 issues here that I can think of. For me and many people around the world, the X100 is the perfect everyday carry camera. And the nature of having a camera that you carry around with you every day means that a lot of your shots are just snapshots of the world around you. A lot of the photos that you take on this camera probably won't be portfolio shots and therefore don't need to be at such a high resolution. Like I said before, the sensor in the X100VI is the same sensor that we have in the X-T5. So we already know that the RAW files from this camera are pretty big. If you're shooting in compressed RAW, these are about 45 to 50 megabytes per photo, and if you're shooting in uncompressed RAW, these can go above 80. We live in a world where storage is pretty cheap, but having bigger files is still going to slow down your editing process, and if you don't have a brand new up-to-date computer, your computer could take some time to process these files. With there being such a high megapixel count, the new sensors are also slightly worse in low light. This is not the end of the world, they're still pretty good, but I think if I was upgrading my X100V, I probably would want something that is a little bit better in low light, considering the camera is going to be 4 or 5 years newer. And the final downside to the sensor is that the camera still uses the same battery. Fujifilm have actually said that the new sensor does have a better battery life, but what they've actually done is they've added an eco mode to the camera, and when the camera is in the eco mode, that is how they can get better battery life out of the camera. This usually comes with the cost of a reduction in the screen quality, or in the autofocus speed, or something like that. There's always like a little bit of a trade-off. It's doing something less so that it can use less battery. There is also another feature on the camera that's going to use more battery, and that is the IBIS. It is quite hard to criticize the inbuilt stabilization. I do think this is a really good feature that Fuji have added, but for me, one of the things that I love most about the X100 is the simplicity of it. It really does take you back to basics, and I like that there's not too much tech built into this camera that does stuff for you. I know from using Sony cameras that there is so much amazing technology inside those cameras, but it makes shooting on them really boring because it feels like the camera is doing all of the work for you. I'm not going to try and say that inbuilt stabilization is bad, but for me personally, I don't think that it's that important. Overall, I am a bit of a believer that too much technology kind of ruins the fun, which leads perfectly onto the point about autofocus. I've always been really happy with the autofocus on the X100V. I use single point, I don't use the face detection or anything like that. I could maybe count a handful of times where I've missed focus on the X100V in about 36,000 shots. So for me, the autofocus on this is great and doesn't really need improving. The new autofocus on the X100 Mark VI comes with like car detect, plane detect, all kinds of like AI features, and honestly, I don't really think it needs it. If I was taking a photo of a plane, I would just put the little box on my camera where the plane was. Like I said on the previous point, I do think that too much tech kind of ruins the fun. If I was going bird watching, this would be really helpful, but I don't really think anyone's going bird watching with an X100. One place that I really do feel like the V is lacking is in the manual focus department. I've said it before on my channel, but the manual focusing on the X100V is a pretty miserable experience. I really do think that if they implemented some sort of rangefinder focus like the Leica M series cameras had, where we had like a little focus patch thing in the rangefinder, I think this would be an amazing experience, and I would definitely buy a new X100 if it had that. But for me, the new autofocus features just don't really interest me. This next point is probably the most important one, and that is the price increase of the camera. In the UK, the new X100 costs £1,599. And for me, at this price point, there are much better options, even within Fuji's own lineup. I also want to add in here that when I bought my X100, I paid £1,099 brand new. I know that the price did increase when there was loads of hype on TikTok over the X100, but this new X100 is £500 more than what I paid for my V. And that is only if you can get an X100 Mark VI at retail price, because we all know that by the time this video is out, all of the pre-orders are going to be sold out, and people are probably going to be selling these at a much higher price. So anyway, going back, the new X100 6 is £1,599, but in the UK you can buy a Fujifilm X-T5 that has the same sensor, the same inbuilt body stabilization. It's basically the same camera, but you can change the lens, and this camera is currently £1,450, which means that it is £150 less than the new X100. Now granted, this doesn't come with a lens, but you can buy a 23mm f2 lens for a couple of £100. Currently on MPB, you can buy an X-T5 and a 23mm f2 lens, the same as what is on the X100, for £1,628. That's only £29 more than what the new X100 is if you can buy it for retail, and you're getting a camera with exactly the same sensor, the inbuilt stabilization, all of the features of the new X100, but you can change the lens. This makes so much more sense with the 40 megapixel sensor and the IBIS, because to be honest, if I was using a camera as my main camera, I would definitely want these features. But if I was using a camera for work, I would also need a camera that you could change lenses on, which is why the X-T5 makes so much more sense with these specs than the new X100 6. Next, let's talk about film simulations. You do get 3 new ones with the new X100 6. You get Reality Ace, Nostalgic Negative, and you get a Turn to Bleach Bypass. These would be really cool to have in camera. Fujifilm aren't going to be releasing them for the X100V because they know that these film sims sell new cameras, so there's no chance that they're going to put them in this. But if you do shoot RAW, you can hack Adobe Lightroom to use these film simulations in their program. This does mean that you can't use them in the camera, so if you are a JPEG only shooter and you want to use the new sims, you are going to have to buy one of the new cameras. But again, 2 of these film simulations, Nostalgic Negative and a Turn to Bleach Bypass, are in the X-T5, and Fujifilm did announce that Reality Ace is also coming to the X-T5 in a future update. So again, I'm going to say it, I do think you would be better off just buying an X-T5. Finally, I do want to touch on the video specs of the camera. If you are a video shooter and you do want your camera to shoot video, there is no doubt that the new X100 is so much better than the X100V for video. So if you really love shooting video, I do think it is a good upgrade. Being able to have 4K 10-bit 60 frames a second in a compact camera with inbuilt stabilization is absolutely great, and I do think that 6K is total overkill, but it does shoot 6K 30 frames a second. I'm not sure if that is 10-bit or if that is 8-bit, but either way, it's really cool that it can do that. So overall, is it a better camera? Absolutely yes. Don't get me wrong, everything I've said in this video is just my personal opinion, and to be honest, if I could get an X100 6 for the same £1,099 that I paid for the V, I would definitely do it. But the price increase for me just doesn't justify all these features which I don't really need. And I still think that that is the choice of the individual. If you've watched this video and you still think it is for you, then that is great. You've considered all your options and you've decided that it is the one for you, so I would definitely recommend going out and buying it. But if you are like me and you're constantly tempted by new gear, I just wanted to give an alternative opinion before you went out and spent your money. I'm very aware that chasing new gear is the #1 way to get obsessed with the wrong things in photography. For most people, buying a new camera is not going to make you a better photographer, even if you think that it will. Trust me, I've been there. I've found that instead, spending your money on something like a photography course will change your mindset and change your perspective so much more than having the latest and greatest technology. Ultimately, the choice is up to you, but it doesn't really matter what camera you use as long as you are going out and shooting things that you love and things that make you happy. If you've stuck this out to the end, thank you so much for watching. I got up 3 hours early this morning to make this video, so I really appreciate people watching it. Thank you so much, and I will see you in the next one.